We were like any other Canadian family. We heard about crime. We would read about it in the newspapers, and we would feel badly. We would try to empathize with the individuals involved, the victims, but like everybody else, we were busy with our lives. It was when our son was assaulted that we learned his attackers were young offenders. It was then that we started to learn. We started to learn, about brain injury, about survival, about life after a traumatic brain injury. And I also started to learn about Canadian criminal law, about Canadian justice systems, court procedures, and everything I possibly could to anticipate what I thought would unfold the way all Canadians believed things should unfold when you've been hurt. We believed that there would be agencies there to assist us, to help us. We believed that the Crown was actually going to work with us, explain things to us, as though they were our lawyer. And what we found was completely the opposite. All of the rights are now granted to those that have hurt your child. The victimizers, under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as the accused, have more rights, and their rights are paramount over the rights of anybody else in this country, their chartered rights. And we recognized and learned that we weren't the only ones in Canada that were going through this, that there were thousands of parents from coast to coast whose children have been hurt, whose children have been murdered, whose young daughters have been raped and violated by people under the age of 16, and they were afraid to talk. Because they were so emotionally destroyed, and in many cases, when there's a homicide, they're financially destroyed because 98% of parents of murdered children end up in divorce. We found something out that we did not know existed, and that was what life after criminal victimization, and it is not a good place to be in this country. We found out that Canada stood 26th in a list of countries around the world with respect to rights of victims of crime. We found out that Canada was a signatory to the UN Convention on the Rights of Victims, and yet it didn't comply. Karla Homolka and Paul Bernardo murdered 3 young girls. One of those was Leslie Mahaffey. She was, I believe, 16. When she was murdered, Ryan, her young brother, was only 7 years old. After the murder, I believe the trial took 3, 4, 5 years. It takes a huge amount of time in the Canadian justice system. Then after the trial, there's the appeal period. Then after the appeal, there's the sentencing. Then after the sentencing, some creep wants to write a book or a movie and invade the privacy of the family all over again. Because of all that media, and what happened to the Mahaffey family is very typical, is that Ryan became very detached. He was living in a single-family environment, single-parent environment. He had very, very low self-esteem. He had no future. Yet his sister's killer received a Queen's University education, courtesy of the Canadian taxpayers, and yet the Canadian taxpayers did absolutely nothing. No social programs, nothing to support the family of the victim. We couldn't give money to help people. We were contacted from people from all over Canada whose child was murdered. They couldn't go back to work. They were frustrated. They couldn't write a check. I can empathize with that. When my son was dying, I couldn't even hold a pen, let alone remember how much money I had in the bank account. So these people couldn't buy food. They couldn't pay their phone bills. They were having all kinds of trouble. We wanted to help them. We wanted to provide them with some money, some assistance, because no social agencies in Canada do that. But we couldn't do it because as a registered charity, the Charities Directorate and Revenue Canada would prevent us from providing them with some funding if they owned a car, if they owned a house. They needed to be financially destitute before we could give them some funding.